I wrote a screenplay once many years ago, and this kid who was a TV director at that point read it and didn't like it, quite rightfully, because it wasn't any good. But it was Steven Spielberg. He was a friend of mine, which would have changed my life, I guess, if it had been a better screenplay.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. Next up on a week-long tribute to Saveur is Colman Andrews, one of the publication's founding editors who also served as editor-in-chief from 1996 to 2001. Colman's travel writing and recipe-based reporting had him traveling the world in search of the good stuff, well before Bourdain coined the term, and he served as the beating heart for the publications for nearly a decade. On this episode, we talk about some of his earliest stories in Saveur and how he and fellow editors really changed the game of food writing forever. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Colman Andrews, welcome to This Is Taste. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
This is really cool to have you in the studio.
Thank you.
This is part of our Saveur week. You and Dorothy founded Saveur with others, and we'll get into that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to first start and ask you in your memoir, which is great, My Unusual Table. I love that. I've been reading it.
Usual Table, not Unusual Table.
Oh.
That's another book I haven't written yet.
My God, my notes are wrong. Thanks for correcting me.
That's all right. It's a good title, though.
I feel it could go both ways. Actually, I love it. It's almost like a Freudian slip because I feel like usual and unusual is how you roll.
Yeah, there you go.
So, but I've been reading it, and you talk a bit about the founding of the magazine as well as your life. But in 1994, when you launched the magazine, you wrote that you weren't reading food magazines. You didn't read any that were being published at the time. Why were you not reading magazines?
I went through a period years before that, when I was in college and after college and so forth, where I read all the classic books of the time on food, M.F.K. Fisher, A.J. Liebling, Joseph Wexberg, all those people. And I read Gourmet magazine pretty religiously. That was probably the only one I read, but that was the one that was the most serious, had the most in-depth, a lot of travel-based food stories. And there's really no reason why I stopped reading them except I don't know. I kind of lost interest. It's like, I knew it all. Well, that's obviously not true, but I was getting less and less from them. And I was never that interested in just reading recipes, unless it was a recipe for a kind of food I was trying to learn or something.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of the other magazines had a lot of focus on celebrity chefs or just plain celebrities who would invite you over to their house and do this staged dinner party and things like that. Not to criticize those magazines because they were all doing a pretty good job of what they did, but it just didn't interest me at the time.
Well, you write about in your memoir how Saveur rejected the recipe test kitchen in some ways. You rejected the idea of the low-fat cassoulet, which is a great note, and really I take that as well. And you rejected writing recipes without context, and we're going to get into those early meetings with you and Dorothy and the team, but let's get into that just from the jump.
Well, we definitely had we took test kitchen very seriously and tested recipes. We had a succession of great people running the test kitchens. And test kitchen in different locations. And it was very important to us. What I had said was that there was a kind of a test kitchen that would have a large staff and would have almost an assembly line. And they would, doing an article on artichokes, and they'd get in, 3 flats of artichokes, and they'd do everything they possibly could with them and develop new recipes and try and, some classic recipes and whatever. And that's fine. And that worked for them. The first article we did on artichokes was by a pretty well-known food historian named Clifford Wright, specialty in the Mediterranean. And it was about a country where artichokes are perhaps the most important vegetable, that country being Syria. I would dare say a lot of places, a lot of publications at that time, much less today, would be likely to run any kind of an article about Syria.
We're talking about the early 90s and seriously politically charged place.
Absolutely. But that was a part of the culture. The artichokes are a major part of the culture there, the culinary culture in that country. So that's the article we did.
Yeah, and I'll step back and just say, like, when I said you rejected the test kitchen, obviously Saveur is well known to having a test kitchen. It was more the traditional test kitchen, which was the assembly line,
Right,
as you noted.
right.
Let's go back to the first time you worked with Dorothy.
Sure.
It was for a roundup of port, and you write about this in your memoir, and you can tell me about it. You'd written a typical service piece, which was of the time. Service was a big part of food writing at the time, and that's what you did. A lot of it, as well as obviously a lot of narrative. But then, she kicked it back and said, "We need more feeling. It needs to be you need to be informed in discovery." Let's talk about that meeting you had with her.
Right. I don't honestly know. I may have written this. I don't know if that was actually the first thing I ever wrote,
okay.
but it was one of the early ones, and it was for a magazine called Apartment Life, which evolved into Metropolitan Home, which is where I worked most with Dorothy before Saveur. And I used to do these articles for other publications. And what I do is, okay, I'm writing something about port. So I'd have an expense account and I'd buy, 15 bottles of good port. I'd sit there and I'd taste them all. And my neighbors would pass by and say, oh, that poor guy. Then, I'd do some history research and say, this is the origins of port, and this is here are the ones I like the best, and here's some tasting notes for them. Blah, and that was it. And that formula had worked perfectly well for me for some years as a freelance. But Dorothy said, well, you're not in this article. And when did you discover port? And what did you first think about it? And what do you think about it now? And what is your personal experience of it? And I had sort of been discouraged from doing that kind of thing by other publications. Well, don't use the first person pronoun. Nobody cares what you think. They want to know whatever. And Dorothy said, no, we do care what you think. That's why we're asking you to write it rather than somebody else.
And then started your relationship with Dorothy. And I really wanted to focus on that moment because, things changed after that. And that the idea of the narrative, like narrative food writing, using first person and explaining it's not about authority, it's about discovery. And that's
Absolutely.
Really what Saveur was founded on.
Absolutely. Yeah, the idea was we don't know everything. We're going to do our research so we don't just go in blind. And then as we discover it, we're going to tell you what we discover and how we discovered it.
It's amazing.
Take you along with us.
And the reason we're dedicating this week to your magazine, the founding of it, is this is the start of what informs what we do in food media and what we do in cookbooks. It's such an important moment in history, and I'm so happy you're here to tell me about it.
I'm glad you feel that way.
I really do, and I think many people share my opinion how the early Saveur and later Saveur just informed what we do. Let's talk about those early meetings, those first editorial meetings when it's you. Dorothy had been successful, and you can listen to her episode previously about her career with Apartment Life. But then you guys all came together and said, we need to do a different food magazine. What are those first meetings like?
Well, sitting around in a conference room and really making it up as we went along. We should do this. No, I don't know about that. Everyone does that. Well, what if we do this? Well, let's do that, but do it a different way. And really key to the discussions, it wasn't myself and Dorothy. It was the two of us. Christopher Hersheimer, I'd like to talk a little more about her involvement and her development too, and Michael Grossman, who was the creative director, in effect the designer, among other things, and he had other kinds of input. But even actually before he was really involved, the three of us were sort of sitting around saying, what kind of things would we like to read? What would make us want to read food magazines?
Yeah.
And we kept coming back to food in context, the story behind the food, the people that made it. And, my point, you mentioned the low-fat cassoulet. There had been a recipe in the New York Times for low-fat cassoulet, and I think it was turkey sausage and whatever. And I said, it's fine. You could probably make, if you're a decent cook, you can make a very nice tasting dish with turkey sausage and beans and, olive oil instead of duck fat or whatever. But don't call it cassoulet, because cassoulet has a hundreds of year old history, and it means a lot to the places that it came from and the traditions, and it's made a certain way in different parts of the region for different reasons. Let's honor that, and let's try to. We can't do it exactly like they do it because we're not them, but let's try to make it as close as we can.
And just to add to that, it's not just the recipes, but the photography and the art direction.
Yeah, sure.
And shooting in situ, which is a big part of food media now. My cookbook work and many of ours are around. That's like the North Star is like in the on location shooting. But you decided early that you needed to do that.
Well, and I mean, I'm sure Dorothy talked about the origins of the magazine with the French Saveur, but that was one of the things. The idea was we would use their photography and translate their stories and so forth, which turned out not to be a good idea.
Not a great idea.
But their food photography would be they'd do something about a fisherman in the Gironde, and they'd have an old dilapidated fishing boat, and then it would be set with fine crystal and a candelabra, and I said, no, that's not what we want to do. We want to make the food look the way it should look, and the surroundings look the way they should look. Now, I did an episode of one of Robin Leach's shows once with
Robin Leach.
Yeah.
I love that reference.
Yeah.
Oh my God! If you don't know who Robin Leach is, friends, Google that shit.
Yeah, he was a piece of work. But there was a food stylist from I don't remember where she worked, and she was saying things like, well, and he said, well, what are some of the secrets of food styling? And well, one of them is, when you cook, when you show pasta, you can't have any ends of the noodles sticking out. You have to tuck them all in. And I said, oh, my God, let me call Christopher right away and tell her to tuck those. I mean, it was just the silliest thing. And one of the things, whether or not this is obvious to people, with at least the era when Christopher was and Dorothy and I were there, all the food photography that she did and most of what other people did was all done with natural light. Yep. There was not a single a light that came in
I mean, and when you're talking about shooting reportage, you can't lug lights around with you, and that's just it's out of necessity. But also, when shooting natural light, it's beautiful. It's just a certain energy to that.
Yeah, we did take a lot of. Would you mind if we take this plate outside and put it on a chair under the oak tree? We still do that today.
It's required. Let's go back to that issue 1, meetings, and just I have a couple questions about issue 1. Let's first talk editorial. I'll also talk about business, but do you remember some of the ideas that were floating around, what you needed to do for the issue 1?
Well, I think at that point we were still considering translating articles from the French original. I think we ended up publishing maybe 3 or 4 articles. I don't know if there were any in the first issue. I honestly don't remember that were translations of the French, but I know we wanted to do, probably it may well have been the idea of the writer Peggy Knickerbocker, but we really wanted to do something about Oaxaca, which now is kind of commonplace. Now there's Oaxacan restaurants in every other block, and everybody, there's millions of mezcals out there, and at that point there was almost none. And we wanted to do something about the different moles of Oaxaca, and so we did this article, and we did, I think, one of my favorite covers ever of this wonderful woman with holding a bowl of squash blossom soup.
Wow.
And not the kind of thing you would see on other food magazines at that point.
Yeah, real people and real objects, and no prop styling.
But it obviously took us a while to get up and running and refine what we did, I think. But I think that first issue was great, and it had a lot of. I don't have it in front of me. I can't, unfortunately, tell you everything else that was in it. But one of the things that we did, which we established from the first issue, was we had this roster of contributing editors, which was a combination of the people I knew and Christopher knew and Dorothy knew. And I mean, it was Marion Cunningham, Alice Waters, Ken Hom, Sheila Lukens, Paula Wolford, Jonathan Waxman, Deborah Madison, Daryl Corti from Sacramento, that really were some of the top people in food and wine at the time.
But also, it's a blend of working chefs, cookbook authors, and journalists.
Exactly.
Cool, and I think that instinct was radical in a way that actual chefs could write food editorial.
Yep. And some of them wrote, some of them didn't write, but they were available if we had questions. And Paula Wolford actually wrote some very good pieces for us.
Let's talk about the business case, because I really want to get a sense. Was there a market for this magazine? Did you feel that from issue 1 you were successful financially?
That's really not my side of things, and it's hard for me to say. I know that in the early years, we did get a lot of very impressive advertising, a lot of big names in not just in food and wine. In fact, less in food and wine, but in cars and travel and cosmetics and all kinds of other really blue chip advertisers. I was never involved on the business side.
Yeah, bless you for not having to.
Yeah, well, exactly. And Dorothy was much more of a liaison between the two sides. Was a liaison between the two sides. But she kind of it was kind of a point of pride that she, which we much appreciated, that she insulated the rest of us from having to worry about that.
A good editor-in-chief does that,
yeah,
and
exactly.
lets you cook essentially. But let's talk about budgets, though. I just like to reminisce a little bit about how back then you had some budget. You could travel a little bit, and the magazine. Let's talk a little bit about where you were going, and maybe like a little bit of what the expense account was looking like. It was pretty nice back then, right?
I mean, it's this wonderful situation, which was basically Christopher and I did many stories together. We traveled together, and she would not only be the photographer, but she'd kind of be the I want to say recipe, but I mean she'd be the food mind from the test kitchen side too, saying, well, that might be a little difficult, but we can whatever. Let's try this. Get them to do that. Ask her, they'll do that. But we could pretty much decide where we wanted to go, and it would be let's go. I mean, I think one of the things that stands out is we did, because of current situations, we did a story in Israel. There was a writer named Ehud Yoneh, who I had known when I worked at New West magazine in Los Angeles. He was a writer there. He's the one that wrote the original story that Top Gun is based on.
Oh, wow.
And anyway, he had an olive oil business from the Galilee where his family farm was. And he said people used to say, oh, I didn't know they had olive oil in Israel. Yeah. And he'd say, read your Bible, man.
Yeah, exactly. Read some older books, older texts.
Yeah. But he moved back to Israel and was engaged to be married to a Moroccan Jewish woman who lived next door. And they invited us to the wedding. And so we went, and it was a wedding where there were his father had been very involved with the local Arab community, and so he had these Bedouins were friends who came, and they cooked their food, this big lamb, and they made coffee from scratch, grinding the beans and roasting them, and then they had the Moroccan Jewish table, which was very elaborate and a different kind of food. Yeah, and we did this great story, and we happened to be there in a quiet period, luckily. But that's the kind of thing we could just we could go off and do that. And
but you probably traveled light, and the budget, even though you were traveling and you had budget, it still wasn't like a gourmet or even like a food and wine budget.
No, it certainly wasn't the glory days of gourmet kind of budget. Yeah. But and we flew we flew economy class, unless at one point we had a trade deal with Lufthansa, so we could fly.
Nice.
Over there and then connect from Frankfurt or something. But we weren't profligate, let's say, but we didn't. It wasn't backpacking either.
It wasn't fair enough, and I appreciate the saying it wasn't backpacking. Colman, let's talk a little bit more about other spots you were traveling in those early issues of Saveur. Do you get a sense? Was there adventure? Was there havoc? Was there things that went wrong that you fixed? I mean, from my experience, this happened literally every trip. But tell me.
Well, there were always little glitches and misconnections, and Christopher had a great story. I wasn't involved with this, but we were doing something in New England. And there was a man, writer, whose name I won't mention, but he, very good writer and a good friend of ours. And he had a cousin named Chuck, who was known for his clam chowder, I think it was. And this whole shoot was based around going up to wherever he was in Massachusetts, and they have Christopher and whoever the writer was get there, and our friend says, "Oh, you're a little late. Chuck just left," and this became a catchphrase, like "Chuck just left," just like okay. But no, I mean, there weren't any great tragedies. I mean, I do remember we were doing a story in Provence, and we had to go out to this island, the Île de Porquerolles, and we missed the ferry. And so how do we get out there? And we actually found a woman that had a boat that would take people out there, and we managed it. And she leaves us on this rocky beach and pre-cell phone, and we have to say, okay, now how do we get to the hotel? And but we worked it out.
Hitchhiking, you worked it out.
Yeah.
And speaking of technology, this is pre-digital.
Yep.
So when you're shooting on location, I mean, protecting the film must have been a big issue. I mean, that film leaves your possession, you have no story.
There was a story we did about a once famous, kind of sort of forgotten now, French chef, Jacques Maximin, in Provence, and he had opened a small restaurant at his home near Vence, and we did this story there. And he was a kind of a difficult person to deal with, and we said, we'd like to shoot this, this, and this, and he said, no, un entrée, un plat, un dessert. He was going to decide, and we walked around it. But anyway, the film was shot and got home, and Christopher drove home from the airport, or her husband picked her up from the airport back in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and for some reason, she said she never does this, but she left everything in the car, her equipment and everything in the car. And this is rural Pennsylvania. Next morning, it's all gone.
Oh my gosh! The film.
So we actually went back, and we didn't dare ask him to let us shoot again. So we literally did this thing where we were just having lunch, and I'd be sitting there, and we'd order some food, and she'd say, "Oh, Colman, let me take your picture," and then she'd go, and we got a good story.
It worked out, but you guys literally had to go all the way back,
exactly,
to Provence to do that.
That's a terrible burden on us, having to go back to Provence.
Yeah, there was no
we hated that.
no G drive that you could just upload your photos to after shooting.
No, not at all. There weren't no cloud. The only clouds were in the sky.
Yeah, and it makes those early issues special to realize that all the effort, especially with you were using, I'm sure, obviously Apple was in your world in '94 to lay out, but layouts were trickier, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, that's not something I had to be involved with, but yeah, sure. I actually remember when we first got our early days, we did not have external email.
Yeah,
and I remember when we got that. In fact, we had or internet, and I remember it was probably 3 years in or something that suddenly, oh, you mean I can just, really, I can send a message to this person over at this other company or this other, really?
It's amazing to think about technology, because you write in your memoir about being at New West and being a writer and being, you write about being included in the memorandum circulation. And that's the way you as an outsider got linked into what was happening. Yeah,
well, in New West, they actually bought the newsroom set up from All the President's Men to furnish the office at New West.
Literally from the set of the film.
Yeah, exactly. All the desks and the partitions and all that. And everyone, of course, had typewriters. So you walked in there, and it was this cacophony of typewriters. And I remember one of the writers came in one day, and he said, "I just bought a word processor." I said, "What do you mean a word processor? I'm a word processor, and this is my printout mechanism." And little did I know.
Wow. Have you done any screenwriting? Have you thought about getting these stories down? I feel early food media can be rich.
My father was a screenwriter.
Anything we know?
Novelist and screenwriter. If you stay up really late and you like war movies from the 1940s, maybe.
Yeah.
But I wrote a screenplay once many years ago, and this kid who was a TV director at that point read it and didn't like it, quite rightfully, because it wasn't any good. But that was Steven Spielberg, which would have been he was a friend of mine, which would have changed my life, I guess, if it had been a better screenplay. But that's all.
If you've seen that movie about Steven Spielberg's life, you know how eager he was as a young man.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I mean the thing I always thought, I was never really attracted to writing screenplays because as part of being an editor is I like to have control.
Yeah,
I like to, I would have to be the producer, director, whatever. Otherwise, if you throw a screenplay out there and everybody starts rewriting it and whatever, I wouldn't like that.
No, I'm with you on that. Biggest coup from Saveur from those days that a story you got in the magazine that, man, looking back, this was a big deal to get this in.
Well, I mean, I would have to say, and again, a chef that was incredibly famous. And if we were talking to your audience 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they'd ooh and ah, was Freddy Girardet, who had a restaurant called Girardet in Switzerland. The other chefs called him Le Pape, the Pope. He was that respected and that well known. He sold his restaurant to his sous chef, Philippe Rochat, who had been with him for many, many years. And he sort of thought that he would be welcomed back in the kitchen as an advisor and whatever. And Rochat said, no, this is my restaurant now. We don't, come in for dinner, but stay out of the kitchen. So he was very disillusioned and not very happy. We somehow, through a connection I had in the Swiss wine business, talked him into cooking a meal for us at his house. So we went to his house, met his wife. I say he cooked it well. He sort of supervised. He had a couple of his former employees in who actually did the work. And, we asked his wife at one point if he cooked dinner for her. And she said, no, absolutely not.
He's serving cognac.
He's not that kind of a cook, He's not. At the time, it was called Girardet after Girardet. I thought that was
great headline.
That was quite a coup. As far as I was concerned, means nothing to anybody now. But
no, it's a great story. What about a location that you shot in? You talk about shooting in Syria in the early '90s. Anything else that comes to mind right away about locations that maybe now are like big food destinations, but maybe back in the '90s wasn't?
Well, I mean, Catalonia, which is one of, as you know, my specialties. But I think, we did several big comprehensive issues, one on Burgundy, one on Venice, one on California, and one on Ireland. Ireland's a good example of something that, that we had to listen to all the jokes about, Irish food, 3 kinds of potatoes and, and a 6-pack of Guinness or something,
Yeah.
To which I'd always reply, you don't drink Guinness from a 6-pack.
Oh, that's a great response. Like, shut up. And also the seafood is like the best in the world. So let's get real.
And now, there's incredible restaurants there now on every level. But we're kind of ahead of the curve with that, I think. But even with Burgundy and Venice, which are certainly in Venice, obviously incredibly well-known and a cliched tourist destination, but we got invited to the house of a fishmonger from the fish market who cooked a big Sunday meal for us, and things that were not accessible, let's say, to everybody.
Yeah, those are cool memories. I feel like I wanna go back and read more of early Saveur. How do you actually access these issues? Do you have a sense? Can you buy them online or?
I have complete sets, a couple of complete sets, I think. But it's interesting. I don't know, and this would have been something to ask if you've talked to Kat already.
Yeah.
Some stories of mine and of other people's from that era are online, and some are not. And I can't make any sense of why, some made the cut and some didn't. Unfortunately, for rights reasons, none of the photographs that Christopher took are on the website. But
interesting. Well, we did speak with Kat, and her episode will air later in this week, and you will hear all about the new Saveur. And the reason I wanted to do this whole week of episodes is because it's really changing, and Kat is a big part of that story.
Oh, I know it is. Yeah, that's great. No,
it's wonderful. So stay tuned for Kat Craddock later on. Why did you end up leaving the magazine?
So the company was kind of a strange way this all came around, but the company that published the French magazine was called Bonnier, which was there's 2 big publishing families that are related. One is Swedish, and I think they pronounce it Bonnier, and then Bonnier is the
hilarious
one, whatever. But the Swedish side of the family bought into World Publications, which had published Saveur, and came in and looked around and started asking questions, and I had to fire a bunch of people at their insistence, which I didn't like. And the design of the magazine changed tremendously. I saved a whole sheaf of responses from the public were not very happy. It said it looked like some cheap supermarket magazine.
Did you
now
just
and all that.
lose budget for photography? Is that why, or does it just become...
No, it was. I don't know. Again, this was a decision that came from the top, from World and from Bonnier, and they brought new people in, brought a new art director, new photo editor, new managing editor, and so forth, and everything changed, and the standards were different.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. But then the day came when the man that ran World Publications came in and said, you make more money than anyone here. I said, yeah, I deserve it, whatever. And I said, well, we'll keep you on, but we're going to cut your salary by half.
Oh.
And I said, no, I don't think so. So luckily, Ruth Reichel, my old friend and colleague, former colleague in many different publications, it seems, had offered me a job as the restaurant reporter for Gourmet. So, at a very
good timing.
Yeah, and a very generous salary. So, I went and did that until Gourmet was folded, which was unfortunate. And I still think that was a silly idea. I told Iris Carmen, who was writing at that point the media column for Women's Wear Daily. She asked me for a quote, and I said, "Yeah, I think Condé closing Gourmet is like that old definition of suicide, that it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem."
Put that in print.
Yeah, but they had an incredibly valuable brand, and I think they thought the brand would still be valuable after the magazine was gone, but I don't think that happened.
Well, we'll get into that at some point, because I think the death of Gourmet and the lack of digital strategy from Condé Nast is a rich text, and really, I'd like to get a sense of when you were working at Gourmet, when you with this, what you were there. I mean, toward the end, I'm sure the budgets were different, but you were there at a great time. I mean, you probably were getting a nice expense account.
I have to say I wasn't technically there because I was never in the office. I think I went into the office once, but yeah, I mean, again, as had been the case at Saveur, if I said, okay, I'd like to go to Italy and do this place that has been described as the best restaurant in Italy, sure, go ahead, And so, it wasn't expensive. I mean, I couldn't go crazy, but it wasn't really a problem.
I just want to, as an aside, I think we're getting to this conversation. We haven't talked actually about your work in detail, because we're covering a lot of broader topics, but
right.
You're really good. I think it needs to be said that your writing is absolutely original, full of voice, full of detail, and it's the kind of food writing that even if it's an older story, I fall into your memoir. And
thank you.
I think it just needs to be said that this isn't some luck that you happen to be at the beginning of Saveur and writing for Gourmet. It's talent.
No, thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about the Daily Meal, because you ended up going from Gourmet to launching a website, which actually, when it launched, it was an interesting idea. And did you thought it was going to work?
Well, it wasn't my concept. It was the concept of Jim Spanfeller, who was the man that put it together and that hired me. And it was a very ambitious concept.
It was.
And there was never the support to bring those ambitions to fruition. There was never the budget. It tried to do too much, let's say. And the Daily Meal today, I think, is it's a very, very different site. But
it's still around today.
Oh, I know. Yeah. You didn't know that?
That's a question mark. Yeah. I did.
It's
around.
It's definitely around.
Okay.
Owned by the same people that own the Tasting Table and several other.
These are like ghosts of 2010.
Yeah.
I mean, this is no shade, obviously. I'm just saying I was unaware that Daily Meal is still around. I should check it out.
Yeah, and actually they do a lot of smart stuff. I mean, they've been doing all this. I suddenly started getting these tweets, and I hadn't realized it had been sold again, and because it was bought by the Tribune Company in Chicago. I suddenly started getting these tweets and these stories. It would be like they did this whole series of any of the food or drink contestants on Shark Tank. It was like, where is so-and-so today? Whatever happened to so-and-so? And very interesting stories.
Absolutely. And I think for a certain genre, that's actually a very wide audience and smart business.
Definitely.
I'll definitely check out Daily Meal. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
But when you were there, you come from a traditional print background, but then you're thrown into this world of the internet and a little early social media. And I worked in food media and online around that time. I've started earlier, but was it a fit? Did you feel like you were doing something cool?
I went in thinking that I could probably adapt a lot of what I did to the site. And realistically, maybe 10% of what I had learned to do or knew with print was applicable. And, I said to somebody, it's like, working with your hands. Like, okay, I'm a pretty good furniture maker. I'm not really, but I'm a pretty good furniture maker. I think I'll play classical guitar.
Yeah.
I mean, you're still using your fingers, but
It's apples and papayas.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's a different game. A valiant effort, and really respect that you were trying to bridge generations. Really challenging. Let me ask you what you like to read today. I greeted you in our lobby, and you're reading an issue of the New Yorker. It looks like, or something.
Yeah, it's the New Yorker.
Like any good true journalist, always has some kind of reading material in their hand. What do you like to read?
Again, I don't read much as far as magazines. I read the New Yorker, which we still get. My wife and I, she likes it too. We still get the old fashioned paper version of them. She also gets it online. I read the New York Times, including the magazine and the book review. I read our local paper in Connecticut, and as far as regularly, other than that, as far as periodicals, I don't really read anything regularly. And again, it's not because I'm not interested or I don't like other things. It's just I don't seem to have time. And part of it is I pretty much, I can safely say I work 7 days a week. I don't necessarily work 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, but I work every day. And because I'm dealing with words, I'm putting words together, I'm creating them myself, or I'm fine-tuning somebody else's or something. It's just like it doesn't seem appealing to me to sit down and read somebody else's words a lot. I don't know. Terrible thing to say. But.
No, it's the truth. When you're on deadline, you can't pick up any extra noise in your brain. But are there any food writers that you are drawn towards?
Well, yeah. I mean, I like besides all of the people that have been around for a while. That Ruth is a good example, and I always enjoyed reading her. But Lagaya Michan and Tejal Rao and people like that are really bringing a different point of view. But they're really good writers. I mean, the only thing we get, as I said, we get I didn't say, but we get the New York Times in paper form too. And every month or something, there's a tea magazine, this big, thick, glossy, basically fashion magazine. And my wife reads it through, and I just turn to
Nagaya. Yeah, I'm 150% on board with that.
Yeah, and
that's the only thing I read.
Interesting stuff, and it's always well crafted. And and other than that, again, I don't. I'm trying to think with the last.
You picked some good people. I'm liking those. Tejal and Lagaya are great.
Oh, one other person I should mention is I don't know if you're familiar with Gustavo Aureliano.
Of course.
Who,
great writer.
and I mean, Taco USA was great, but now he's doing stuff for the LA Times, he would have been somebody I would have hired in a second. In fact, any of them I would have hired in a second
to be at the old Saveur,
at Saveur or anywhere else.
Colman, do you have any regrets from when you were running Saveur in terms of the editorial content or the framing or anything like that?
The one failing of Saveur was that we didn't cast the net wide enough for people from other cultures and other people that were not white, male or female, fairly well-educated food writers. That there are a lot of other options. And, my excuse would have been, well, they didn't come to us. And then the other side of me, the angel on one side, the devil on the other side of my shoulder, the angel says, yeah, but you didn't go out looking for them. You didn't encourage them, which we didn't. And I look at that now as a failure, because we could have had a much richer magazine, I think. It was kind of a joke. Our Michael Grossman, our creative director, when we'd sit around tossing article ideas around, and we'd say, well, Michael, what do you think we should write about? And he'd say, Africa. I'd say, yeah, Africa? That's not a story subject. That's a very broad topic. What do you mean, Africa? Well, I mean, today that would be a much easier question to answer. Yeah, I mean, just wanted to say that.
I'm glad you brought. No, I'm
Yeah.
really glad you brought that up because when you hear this interview, you hear a lot of European-centric white storylines. I think later on, James Osland, and of course, what Kat is doing now reflects the changes that have been made in food media.
Mm-hmm.
And I respect that you can acknowledge that you had blind spots for sure, and it seems. We've come a long way since then. Colman, on This Is Taste, we ask guests about their discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid-fire Fast and Furious taste check. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The best breakfast.
Can I give slightly longer answers? Or do they have to be really fast?
You are a man of words. Yes, you can give slightly longer.
When I was on the Today Show, I used to do that pretty regularly at Saveur, and they asked me to do a segment on breakfasts around the world. And so I brought in examples of typical breakfasts from the Middle East and from Japan and from South America and so on and so forth. And when they got to, what's a typical American breakfast? And I pulled out from under the table there a pizza box and opened it up, and there was a few pieces of cold pizza. And I said, this is the classic American breakfast. But the reality is, I mean, what I eat every day, if that's what you're asking, is I eat Greek yogurt every day, and I eat it with fruit in the winter, and in the summer I eat it with tomatoes and chilies.
You go savory in the summer. I'm into that. My mom's the same way. She does yogurt and cottage cheese with savory for breakfast. Do you have a brand of Greek yogurt that you're going for?
Faye.
Yeah,
I think is good. Yeah,
Faye. Are you going 1%, 2%, going 0%?
0%. Yeah.
Good man.
Yeah,
Good man.
yeah.
Are you on your statin journey, as we all food writers are?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we have various levels of the big boys or the middle boy pills.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to
right.
interject that. The best dessert.
I'm not a big dessert eater, but I do love ice cream. And I'm kind of addicted to this Jenny's flavor, which is called peach preserve and sweet cream biscuit.
Your favorite cookbook of all time?
Really tough, but I would have to say probably the classic Italian cookbook by Marcella Hazan.
Marcella, yeah. Did you have a relationship with her? Or did you ever write about her?
Yeah, I mean, I knew her, and we used. I was at her 80th birthday party, and we've had meals together, and with Dorothy, who is a good friend of hers, and I know Victor, and sure.
Yeah, Dorothy does talk about that in her interview as well.
Yeah.
That birthday party that you went to. Your favorite recent cookbook discovery?
Well, I just was looking at something. Because of my relationship with Ireland and the food community there, I'm a judge with the Irish Food Writing Awards every year, and they just sent me a bunch of cookbooks. And the one that I named is Cookbook of the Year, and it's really a beautiful cookbook and very evocative of the food. Is something called Paradiso by a chef named Dennis Cotter. It won't be available here, but it'll probably be available to order. Paradiso it's a restaurant in Cork. And it was originally called Cafe Paradiso. It's become a little more upscale now. But he's a vegetarian chef. And it's kind of a cliche to say this, but he's one of those vegetarian chefs where if you're not really paying attention, you won't realize it's vegetarian food. It's incredibly complex, savory, imaginative, varied. And he captures all that in the cookbook very well. So that's
I love that.
Top of mind to me right
I love
now.
that reference. And I'm sure if you call up Matt at Kitchen Arts and Letters, he'll get that book for you.
Yeah,
so you can probably find it. Okay, let's go into your favorite New York City restaurant classic edition.
Yeah, they're all closed.
Oh.
21 Club.
21's RIP.
Four Seasons, whatever.
What about the new Four Seasons, the pool and the grill? Do you go back there?
I haven't been, actually.
Yeah.
No particular reason. I come into the city pretty seldom now.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd give you more old-fashioned choices. I mean, the Tavern at the Oyster Bar in Grand Central, or Keen's or something. Old-fashioned kind of guy.
Those are great. No, those are great choices. Los Angeles favorite restaurant classic edition.
Again, they're closed. Jason's, Scandia, things like that. But the ones that are still open, Musso and Frank's, I'd say.
So good.
Possibly Dan Tana's is another contender, but Musso's.
You're hitting those. Do you have a relationship with Michael McCarthy? Do you go to Michael's in either coast?
I know Michael really well, and I used to go to Michael's here when I spent more time in New York, and I occasionally go in Santa Monica when I'm there. But yeah, we've known each other for years.
Yeah.
In fact, when he first opened the restaurant, at New West, I assigned Ruth to write an article kind of tracking it from the early days before they opened until they opened the original restaurant, which is, it was really something. When the chefs were Jonathan Waxman, Ken Frank.
Yep. That's a start of something in the vein of California cuisine.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's like a real epicenter. Michael will be on the show at some point. I'm
cool.
hoping to have him on.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite new New York City restaurant?
How new?
Listen, it's up to you. It could be the last 30 years.
Yeah. I guess the one I go to the most often, and it's partly because the owner's a really good friend of mine, is Barbuto.
Yeah.
Jonathan Waxman's place. One that I don't have a personal connection with that's newer, that I think is really good is Via Carota.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very imaginative, and every time I've been, the food has been right on.
Yep. It's a special place.
Yeah.
Couple more.
Yeah.
A chef you would want to work or learn under.
Okay, I would not want to work under any chef. That is far too hard.
Yeah.
I've never had a desire. I've actually worked a little bit in a kitchen in LA at one point, but I would not want to work under anyone. As far as who I'd like to learn under, I think probably any chef I can imagine could teach me things.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I feel like you could learn anything from a chef who knows half their business.
Exactly.
A couple more. Your favorite vegetable?
Well, not counting the alliums.
Fair.
Yeah.
I like the caveat.
Yeah. Can I say chilies?
Yeah, sure.
Count those? Okay. I'll
That
say chilies.
Yeah, it's a dynamic choice.
Yeah.
Lots of different chilies. Last one. Your favorite sandwich?
Do you consider burgers to be sandwiches?
No, absolutely not.
All right.
That is not a sandwich.
Yeah, okay.
That is a hamburger.
All right. In that case, I'd say probably BLT,
Yeah.
but only in the summer.
Only in the summer. It's a 3 or 4 month window here in the East Coast.
Exactly.
Colman Andrews, this is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Thank you.
This is Taste is hosted by Eliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.